Hi, it's Dave T, and today I'm going to be helping a friend of mine make use of an old 60-watt panel he's got by adding it to his new van, which has a factory fitted 100-watt solar panel. Now the 60-watt panel is going to be ground mounted, and we're going to connect it to the van using new wiring and this connector box, which is going to be externally mounted with MC4 connectors in it. So while I head over there, then how about we see how I actually put this box together. Okay, so the first task we're actually going to tackle is we're going to run a new cable from the solar controller, which in this van is just above the fridge. We're going to run that down to the floor under the bed. There's already an existing cableway that goes out from under the bed to the battery box. We're going to run it through there and then out to the side of the van. And we're using 4mm CSA cable, which is also weatherproof flexible cable. Now the junction box that I've made is basically just something to hold two MC4 connectors, so that we obviously don't want to leave them just dangling outside of the van. So we've got a box which has the two MC4 connectors in it, or half of each, and then a cover which we can take off by a wing nut and then plug the fly leads going to the solar panel. And this is going to be mounted just underneath the van, near the edge, about an inch or so in from the trim, so it's quite easy to reach under and get to take the cover off and then connect and subsequently disconnect the fly leads. Now in terms of the wiring, because we're running in parallel, what we've basically got to do is connect the two positive leads from each of the solar panels into the positive input of the solar controller, and the two negative leads into the negative input. Now the solar controller, the terminals are not large enough to take two pairs of the gauge wire we're using into there. So what instead we're going to do is we need to join them first and then take a separate lead in, so it's a single lead going into the solar controller for each of the positive and negative. So what I've actually found on Amazon for just about £2 or £3 is this fuse connector. And the fuse connector I've modified slightly by cutting away some of the cover so that it can fold down, and I can actually then use this without a fuse in it. Definitely do not put a fuse in this one that's used this way. I can use this as two post connectors, basically connect 3 ring terminals of the 3 different wires, the 2 coming in and 2 going out for the positive, and the same again for the negative. So that's just a convenient, neat way of doing that. And we've wired that and mounted that on the front panel just underneath the solar controller above the fridge, and also from the positive lead coming from that junction box into the solar controller, I've put an inline fuse, which is a 10 amp inline fuse, which will protect the cable in case there's a short or cut in the cable, but it will also provide a convenient means by which we can just disconnect the power input from the solar panels and cut off the input from there. Okay, so one of the things a lot of people are going to be thinking or saying is that you can't mix panels, because the typical explanation is if you mix different wattage of panels, then the smaller panel tends to pull down the larger panel and you don't get the full value. Now this is totally true to a certain extent at least, and certainly something that you really need to pay attention to if you're creating a new system from scratch. However, what we're looking at here is we already have an existing 100-watt panel built into the caravan on the roof from the manufacturer, and we have a 60-watt panel effectively going spare, so effectively it's free. Now, the way that the calculations work, and I've got another video and I'll link above for that, is if you are connecting in parallel, then it will take the sum of the current, the ampage, and the lowest of the voltage. If you're going in series, it's effectively the opposite way round, which basically means it will take the sum of the voltages and then take the lowest of the currents. Now, this means that there is no right or wrong answer that anyone can just give you in terms of how to mix panels. You have to look at the 2 or 3, whatever specific panels that you are using, and look at the maximum voltage of each panel and the maximum current or ampage of each panel, and then do the calculations and work out which way works best. So in this particular instance, with these two panels, we'll actually get a theoretical maximum of 154 watts. Now, this is 6 watts or so off of the ideal maximum, which is obviously 100 plus 60, but that's totally acceptable on the basis of we've got a panel which is free anyway. Now, in terms of the panel, we could, of course, or my friend could, of course, just change that panel later on to an 80 watt panel or even a 100 watt panel, and that would still work, subject to the controller being adequately sized to handle the additional current. Just for reference, if we actually took the same 2 panels we're talking about at the moment, these specific panels, the 100 watt and the 60 watt, if we wired them together in series, we would actually get 123 watts theoretical maximum. So that's quite a significant difference between wiring these 2 particular panels in parallel versus series. So in this case, we're going to connect them in parallel. So it's about 2 weeks later now, and I'm actually away at a CL site near Thetford called Little Lodge Farm, and we're actually here with our friends with the new panel, so it's giving us a chance to have a nice time away and also test out that additional 60 watt panel. Now, initially our tests weren't that great because it turned out there was a break in the extension cable. So once we recrimped the connection in the old cable, nothing to do with what I did the other week, then once we'd sorted that out, we actually found that the external panel, when connected into system versus not being connected into system, took the ampage up from 3.4 amps to 6.2 amps. So that's a 2.8 amp increase. So it's almost contributing at that point in time as much as the roof mounted panel. Now, that might sound somewhat strange. It's not a case of the ground one pulling the roof one down, but what it was the time was kind of mid-morning, so the actual ground mounted panel was pointing directly at the sun, whereas the roof mounted panel was obviously horizontal. So in that situation, the ground mounted one, and this is often the case, can actually be more efficient than a roof mounted flat panel purely because of the angle. So what it definitely does prove is by adding this 60 watt panel in addition to an existing 100 watt panel, we have increased the solar capacity of my friend's van, and by doing it via that external connector, it should be fairly convenient for him to connect or disconnect the panel externally to the van without too much trouble. So I hope you found this video interesting and even helpful, and if you have, then please give it a like. If you're interested in seeing other videos that I make, then please do consider subscribing to my channel. But most of all, thanks for watching.